More than 100 million people were killed in wars during the 20th century, and the total number of people ever killed during wars could be as high as 1 billion. Einstein described wars as a cloak that disguises acts of murder, and Antoine de Saint-Exupéry called it a disease like typhus. With all that in mind, I have a question for you. Why do wartime locomotives kick some serious buttocks? When thinking of British wartime locomotives, a few come to mind. Maunsell's N-Class Woolworths, Robinson's 8Ks, Hunslet's 060 saddle tanks, Bulleid's Q1s. Insert audience-pleasing nickname here. But the largest contribution to the war effort, with over 1,000 locomotives produced, were the Riddle's Ministry of Supply locomotives, better known to you and me as the WDs. The War Department had ordered the construction of LMS 8F 280s for their general freight locomotive. With 852 having been built, they certainly made their mark on the UK railway system, and their impact was felt as far as the Middle East. But the 8F has one glaring issue. It was difficult to build. The combination of a tapered boiler and a Belpaire firebox also don't provide an engine which could be repaired with used parachutes and empty shells. So, Robert Arthur Riddles, the Director of Transportation Equipment for the Ministry of Supply, designed a bare-bones version of these tinier machines. Introduced in 1943, the MOS 280s were not simply the Steiner locomotives but with a parallel boiler and a round-top firebox. For instance, the boiler is 2.5 inches shorter at 11 foot 7.5 inches. The cylinders were increased by half an inch in diameter, giving the Riddles machine cylinders 19 inches bore by 28 inches stroke. 8Fs have a locomotive wheelbase of 26 feet, whilst the War Departments had a 24 foot 10 inches locomotive wheelbase. They also stand taller than an 8F, but only just. All these changes made the WDs very different beasts indeed. Before being shipped to France en masse in July 1944, 457 were loaned out to the big four railway companies of Britain, the LNER alone receiving 350. That's more engines than the LNER's own 04 freight locomotives. But one cannot talk about the Aussies, as crews called them, without mentioning number 7337. On the 1st of June 1944, the locomotive was involved in a serious explosion involving a munitions wagon. Driver Gimbert, upon noticing the first wagon of his train being on fire, stopped the train near Soham, Cambridgeshire. The crew quickly uncoupled the wagon from the rest of the train and drew the wagon as far away from the train as possible. The explosion killed fireman Nightall and signalman Bridgers, and it took the station and station master's house with it. Both Gimbert and Nightall received the George Cross, the highest awarded medal for non-operational gallantry, as well as a medal from the LNER itself. Without their quick action, the explosion could have taken out the whole village. Aussie number 7337 was wrecked in the explosion, but in September 1944 she was curiously rebuilt with a new boiler, which says something about the maintainability of the class if you ask me. After hostilities ended, the War Department itself disposed of 330 members of the class, whilst 533 ended up with British Railways, or BR, in 1948. 200 of these engines were owned by the LNER before nationalisation. However, there was another company which owned a substantial number of WD locomotives. The NS. The Nederlandse Spoorwegen, or Dutch Railways, purchased 184 280s for their own network, later selling 2 to the Swedish state railways. Fitted with stovepipe chimneys, they became the NS Class 4300, nicknamed Kleine Jeeps or Little Jeeps. We'll get on to the big jeeps, I promise. They were treated as mixed traffic locomotives and proved a little unwieldy with the original 225 psi boilers, so the NS lowered the pressure substantially, the reworked engines having a maximum working pressure of just 170. However, they were a brief presence on Dutch metals, having enjoyed a career of just 8 years. The final ones were withdrawn in 1952. 12 Austerity's 280s went even further afield to Hong Kong, where they served the Kowloon-Canton railway. All were fitted with knuckle couplings, sans buffers, but 4 were eventually oil-burning engines. They lasted a little longer than their Dutch sisters, the final pair running in 1962. Another example of the 280s was traded for a USATC S160, but I couldn't find any information about this specific locomotive, I'm sorry. Back in Britain, the most produced British steam locomotive ever found employment on practically all regions, although most notable were the ones allocated to the former LNER sheds, where they displaced the elder Gresley 280s. Most of the LNER or ex-LNER locos worked the colliery lines, their clanking motion garnering them the nickname of wooferdonks, as that is what a poorly maintained example sounded like. And I bet there were some of you who just tried to make the wooferdonk sound to enrich the mental image. Now remember when I said the consolidations or 280 locomotives were nicknamed little jeeps in the Netherlands? Well, that insinuates the existence of a larger, grown-up jeep, and those do exist. You see, in 1944, the War Department wanted a version of the woofers, but with a lighter axle load. Riddles answered their request by fitting an extra pair of driving wheels and lengthening the boiler accordingly. The two tonneaus have a 29-foot 8-inch wheelbase, and they reduced the already moderate 15 3/4 tons of the consolidations to 13.5 tons. Riddles also kept the middle wheel flangeless, a feature which would later return on his 9F2 tonneaus. They hardly look like British locos. A high-pitched boiler, 5,000 gallon tender and wide firebox contributing to a machine which almost looks American in origin. And although only 150 were built, in contrast to the 935 consolidation variants, they were the first 10-coupled production class to work in Britain. All were built at North British of Glasgow. Alba Gubrath. Much like the 280s, the 210s were running in Britain before being exported to France, although 20 differed the pattern by being sent to the Middle East, ending up in Syria and Egypt. However, 16 of these were eventually sold to the Hellenic State Railways of Greece. After their wartime service, the bulk of 210 Austerities went to the NS, becoming their Class 5000. Receiving the same mechanical treatment as the 280s, the grote jeeps, or big jeeps, were mostly used on freight trains, although passenger workings were not rare. The other 27 went back to Britain, 25 working for the Scottish region of BR, with the final 2 working the Longmoor Military Railway. Being both engines which were not meant to last long, as well as being steam engines under the modernisation-driven BR, the engines suffered immensely where maintenance was concerned. War Department locomotives, be they 8Ks or the Riddles machines, were prone to clanking if poorly maintained. Bed irons was another of those unflattering names they gained for themselves. The 25 large austerities lasted until 1962, and none were retained. Although the smaller Dubdies lasted well into the preservation area, they were clearly taken for granted, the entire class disappearing from the UK in 1967. However, one can still be seen today, in the UK no less. Undergoing overhaul at the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway is XNS, and later Swedish State Railways, WD number 79527. It is, sadly, the only consolidation to be preserved. 8 of the shorter-lived 210Os still exist, the majority of them in Greece. 73656, 73659, 73677, and 73682 are the Greek survivors, although 73657 is dumped in a siding and will most likely be cut up. 3 survive in England, these locos being 73651, now named Gordon at the Severn Valley Railway, 73652, now named the Royal Norfolk Regiment, operational at the North Norfolk Railway, and 73672, now named Dame Vera Lynn at the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. The last numerical survivor is 73755, Longmoor, the 1000th locomotive to be ferried to France. She resides in the Dutch Railway Museum in Utrecht, the Netherlands. She, too, will most likely never run again. Bonus points if you can count all the separate nicknames I used throughout this video. Hi folks, I'm going to keep the closing statements of this one short. I'm still working on America Sings, the series is not dead, don't worry. Secondly, the next Those Great Locomotives are going to be mini episodes. I'll aim for them to be about 4 to 6 minutes long, and I'll be covering the Class 17 Claytons, the Class 37 Tractors, and finally the Southern Railway N15X classes. The next big TGL episode will be on the LNER P2s, as someone reminded me that each member of the classification was unique. And with that out of the way, cue the obnoxiously loud outro. Cheerio.